I stared at the final payment confirmation on my screen. $100,000 of debt, gone. That same night, Bruce packed his bags and told me our marriage was over. "You were just convenient," he said, not even looking me in the eyes. His new girlfriend. Emma laughed when I called, asking where he'd gone. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. A financial advisor who couldn't see this coming. Pathetic. But 6 months later, he's standing on my doorstep, broke and desperate. He has no idea who I've become. I sat in my car outside. My favorite restaurant now. The place where Bruce had proposed to me 5 years ago. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was here to finally sign the divorce papers he'd been dodging for weeks. Through the window, I could see him already seated, hunched over a water glass, looking nothing like the confident man who'd walked out of our home half a year ago. The diamond tennis bracelet I'd just treated myself to caught the afternoon sunlight. A small reward for the promotion I'd received last week. Senior financial advisor at Meridian Wealth, the competitor to the firm where Bruce and I had once worked together. The firm that had sided with him after our split, making my position there untenable. Their loss. My phone buzzed with a text from my lawyer. "Remember, don't agree to any changes. The terms are more than fair considering what he did." Fair. What a concept. Was it fair that I'd spent 3 years meticulously paying off Bruce's gambling, debts, and secret credit cards? Was it fair that the moment financial freedom was in sight, he'd revealed his affair with Emma, a client he'd been advising for months? Was it fair that I'd come home to half-empty closets and a note that said simply, "I need something more"? I took a deep breath, smoothed my designer dress, another recent indulgence, and stepped out of my new car. The hostess recognized me immediately. "Ms. Wilson, your husband is already seated." "Ex-husband," I corrected with a smile. "And it's back to Ms. Hayes now." As I approached the table, Bruce stood awkwardly, attempting a hug that I sidestepped with practiced ease, offering a handshake instead. Professional, distant, the way you'd greet a client you didn't particularly trust. "Pia," he said, his voice catching. "You look amazing." I did. That was the thing about rebuilding your life from scratch. You got to decide exactly what the new version looked like. And this version wore confidence like armor. "Let's skip the small talk," I said, placing my portfolio on the table and sitting down. "I have a meeting at 3. Bruce nodded, running his hand through hair that seemed thinner than I remembered. The expensive watch he'd always worn was conspicuously absent. Instead, a pale band of skin marked where it used to be. One of many things he'd had to sell, I'd heard. "I wasn't sure you'd actually come," he said. "After I missed the last 3 meetings. The courts don't look kindly on delaying tactics," I replied evenly. "And neither do I." A flash of the old Bruce, irritation, defensiveness, crossed his face before settling back into contrition. "I deserve that. I deserve worse, honestly." I didn't acknowledge this attempt at self-flagellation. Instead, I pulled out the divorce agreement, already bearing my signature, and slid it across the table with a pen. "It's the same terms we discussed. The apartment stays with me, you keep the car, what's left of it after you pawn the stereo system, and we each walk away with our respective retirement accounts. Given the circumstances, I think that's more than reasonable." Bruce stared at the papers but didn't reach for the pen. Instead, he looked up at me with those eyes that had once made my heart race. Now I felt nothing but a detached curiosity. Like observing an exotic animal at a zoo. Interesting, but safely behind glass. "Emma's gone," he said abruptly. "She left 2 months ago." I took a sip of water, maintaining eye contact. "I'm aware." This seemed to surprise him. "You are?" "Bruce, we work in financial services in the same city. People talk." especially when someone leaves her boyfriend of 6 months because his unlimited wealth potential turned out to be smoke and mirrors. I allowed myself a small smile. I heard she took the Rolex collection on her way out. The one you assured me was an investment, Pia. They only appreciate in value. His face flushed. It wasn't like that. No? Then tell me, what was it like? I asked, surprised by my own curiosity. For months, I'd imagined this conversation, rehearsed cutting remarks and dismissive gestures. But now that it was happening, I found myself genuinely wanting to understand the math of betrayal. The calculations that had made discarding our life together seem logical. Bruce shifted uncomfortably. I made a mistake. A huge, unforgivable mistake. Which one? I asked coolly. The gambling debts you hid from me for years? The affair? Or just the part where you walked out after I'd sacrificed everything to clear your name? All of it, he whispered, looking down at his hands. When I met Emma, I was already in so deep with the gambling. She seemed like an escape, like someone who saw me as successful even when I knew I was failing. And then when you paid off the last of the debt, I thought I could start fresh, be the person she thought I was. I listened, head slightly tilted, as if examining a particularly complex financial scenario. And how did that work? Out for you? His bitter laugh was answer enough. She was through the money I had left within weeks. Turns out her last 3 boyfriends were all financial advisors too. She has a type, I guess. When I couldn't keep up the lifestyle anymore, well, you know. The waiter approached, but I waved him away. This wasn't a lunch date. This was a business transaction, the final one between Bruce and me. That's a fascinating story, I said, tapping the divorce papers. But it doesn't change anything. Sign the papers, Bruce. He looked up then, desperation clear in his eyes. I've been staying with Clyde, sleeping on his couch. I lost my position at the firm last month. I heard. Client complaints about ethical violations tend to have that effect? I have nothing, Pia, he continued, as if I hadn't spoken. And seeing you now, seeing what you've built without me. His voice broke. I made the biggest mistake of my life walking away from you. 6 months ago, those words might have moved me. 3 months ago, they might have satisfied some need for vindication. Now they were just sounds, signifying nothing. I reached across the table and gently pushed the papers closer to him. We all make choices, Bruce. You made yours. I made mine. And now I've built a life that doesn't have room for someone I can't trust. I could earn it back, he said quickly. Your trust. I could show you that I've changed. The gambling, the lying, it's all behind me. I hit rock bottom and I've been climbing back up. I'm in therapy. I'm attending GA meetings. I'm happy. For you, I said and meant it. Everyone deserves a second chance. Hope flickered in his eyes. But not with me, I continued firmly. That chapter of our story is closed. The hope died, replaced by something darker. Anger always had been Bruce's fallback when charm failed. So that's it? 7 years together, and you're just done? I smiled then, without warmth. I was done the moment you walked out that door. With your bags packed, Bruce. Now I'm just making it official. I glanced at my watch, a real Cartier, purchased with my first commission check after landing a major client who'd followed me from my old firm. I have a meeting in 40 minutes. Are you going to sign, or should I have my lawyer proceed with the contested filing? 7 years earlier, I'd been Pia Hayes, 28, newly certified financial advisor with big dreams and a small cubicle at Rossmore Financial. It was my 3rd month at the firm when Bruce Wilson walked in, all confidence and charisma, transferred from the Chicago office to help expand our high-net-worth client division. I still remember the first time I saw him, leaning against Carol's desk, making her laugh at something while gesturing with his coffee cup. He had this way of commanding attention without seeming to try. Dark hair always perfectly styled, suits that fit like they were created specifically for his frame, and a smile that made you feel like you were the only person in the room. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Who's that? I'd asked Elise, my cubicle neighbor who knew everything about everyone. Bruce Wilson, she'd whispered back, not bothering to hide her appreciation. Rising star from Chicago. Supposedly broke all kinds of records with client acquisition there. Single, 34, and according to office gossip, recently broke up with some socialite whose daddy didn't think a financial advisor was good enough for his princess. I'd rolled my eyes at the gossip, but found myself smoothing my hair when Bruce walked past my desk later that day. "You're Hayes, right?" he'd said, stopping suddenly. "Carol mentioned you landed the Peterson account. That's impressive. They've been with Brightline for decades." I'd straightened in my chair, surprised he knew about my small victory. They wanted someone who could help their daughter navigate her trust fund without blowing through it. I specialize in next-generation wealth planning. His smile had widened. Smart. Build a relationship with the kids before they inherit, and you've got clients for life. He'd extended his hand. "Bruce Wilson. Looking forward to seeing more of your work." His handshake was firm, his gaze direct in a way that made my cheeks flush. As he walked away, Elise had shot me a knowing look that I'd pretended to ignore. 3 days later, Bruce had appeared at my desk again, this time with a proposal. The McKinnons, big real estate family, 3 generations of wealth, are looking to set up trusts for their grandchildren. Right up your alley. Want to co-present? It was unusual for someone at his level to invite collaboration with a junior advisor like me. "Why me?" I'd asked directly. He'd seemed taken aback by my question, then laughed. "Because Peterson is one of our oldest clients, and you convinced them to transition their daughter's account here when everyone else had failed. Because you have the credentials in intergenerational wealth planning that I don't. And because I've read your client proposals, and they're better than most of the senior advisors here." He'd paused, then added with a smile, "Is that enough reasons, or should I continue?" We landed the McKinnon account, the first of many successful collaborations. Working with Bruce was exhilarating. He had an energy about him, an ability to read people and know exactly what they needed to hear. Where I was methodical and detail-oriented, he was intuitive and big picture. We complemented each other perfectly. Our first date happened 3 months after we started working together. We'd just secured a major client, and the celebration with the team had spilled from the office happy hour into a late dinner. As the group thinned, somehow it ended up just being the 2 of us, sharing a bottle of wine and talking about everything except work. "Why finance?" he'd asked, refilling my glass. "You don't fit the typical profile." "You mean I don't fit the bros who were good at math but wanted to make more money than engineering pays stereotype?" I'd teased. "Exactly," he'd laughed. "So, what was it for you?" I'd taken a sip of wine, considering how much to share. "My dad lost everything when I was 16. He trusted the wrong people, made investments he didn't understand, and by the time I was applying to colleges, we were living in my aunt's basement. I rarely talked about this, but something about Bruce made it feel safe. I watched how financial insecurity changed him, changed our whole family. I wanted to understand money so I could never be in that position, and then I realized I could help others avoid the same mistakes." Bruce had reached across the table then, taking my hand. "That's why you're so good with the cautious clients, the ones who need to trust before they invest. And you've never met a risk you didn't like." I'd countered, but squeezed his hand back. "Calculated risks," he'd corrected. "Life's too short to play it completely safe." His thumb had traced circles on my palm, sending unexpected warmth up my arm. "Does that philosophy extend to your personal life?" I'd asked, suddenly bold. "I'm sitting here with the most brilliant woman in the firm, breaking about 6 different HR policies," he'd replied with a grin. What do you think? Our relationship progressed quickly after that. Weekend trips to the coast, late nights discussing client strategies that turned into discussions about our future. Bruce was passionate about everything: his work, his hobbies, and especially us. After years of dating pragmatic, predictable men, his intensity was intoxicating. 6 months in, he asked me to move in with him. His apartment was sleek and modern, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. It cost 3 times my rent, but Bruce insisted it made sense financially. Real estate in this neighborhood is only going up, he'd explained, showing me the market trends. And with both of us here, we'll save on expenses overall. It was logical, appealing, and only in hindsight did I recognize it as the first time. Bruce had used financial reasoning to make an emotional decision sound practical. We settled into a rhythm: late nights at the office balanced by weekend escapes, building our client list and planning our future. When Bruce was offered a junior partnership, I organized a surprise party at his favorite restaurant, inviting colleagues and his closest friends. "I couldn't have done this without you," he'd whispered that night as we swayed on the dance floor, the celebration winding down around us. "You're my secret weapon, Pia." I'd laughed against his shoulder. "Not so secret anymore. Clyde from accounting told me the partners specifically mentioned our client retention rates when they were discussing your promotion. Then I should make an honest woman of you before someone else snaps you up," he'd said. And I'd thought he was joking until he stepped back, reached into his pocket, and lowered himself to one knee in the middle of the dance floor. The ring was stunning, a 3-carat diamond set in platinum, catching the light from every angle. Later, I'd learn it was the first of many purchases made on credit, part of the facade of success Bruce felt compelled to maintain. But in that moment, as the room erupted in cheers and my heart threatened to burst from joy, all I saw was the future we'd build together: successful, secure, and deeply in love. "Yes," I'd said through tears, as he slid the ring onto my finger. "Yes to everything." Our wedding was everything Bruce wanted it to be: lavish, meticulously planned, and featured in a regional lifestyle magazine. 200 guests at the Grand Meridian Hotel, a 7-piece band, custom cocktails, and a 5-course dinner. I'd initially suggested something smaller, perhaps a destination wedding with just close friends and family, but Bruce had been adamant. "We only do this once," he'd said, showing me photos of elaborate floral arrangements. "And half of these guests are potential clients. It's not just a wedding, it's an investment in our future." I'd relented, caught up in his enthusiasm and the whirlwind of wedding preparations that consumed us for the next 6 months. Looking back, I should have paid more attention to the way Bruce's eyes lit up when discussing the business connections at our wedding, rather than the ceremony itself. But at 29, madly in love, and rapidly advancing in my career, I saw his ambition as an asset, not a warning sign. The day itself was magical. Despite the promotional feel that crept in around the edges, Bruce had somehow convinced the venue to give us a discount in exchange for inclusion in their marketing materials. My father, healthier and happier since I'd helped him restructure his finances and find stable employment, had walked me down the aisle with tears in his eyes. "He's a lucky man," Dad had whispered, squeezing my hand as we reached the altar. "Just make sure you keep your own bank account, sweetheart. Independence is security." I'd kissed his cheek, taking his words as the overprotective caution of a man who'd once lost everything. Later, I would recognize it as the first genuine financial advice I should have heeded. The first year of marriage was a blur of professional achievements and domestic adjustments. Both of us were putting in 60-hour weeks, building our client portfolios, and navigating the subtle politics of the firm. We purchased a condominium in an up-and-coming neighborhood, another investment opportunity Bruce had discovered through a client. "It needs work," he'd admitted as we walked through the outdated kitchen and bathrooms. "But we'll build equity with renovations. My client's construction company can do the work at cost if I help his son restructure his student loans. 6 months and 3 maxed out credit cards later, we had the sleek, modern home Bruce had envisioned, featured in the same lifestyle magazine that had covered our wedding. When I expressed concern about the mounting renovation expenses, Bruce had shown me a spreadsheet projecting the property's appreciation. "Trust me," he'd said, kissing away my worries. "I know what I'm doing." And I believed him, because that's what love does. It trusts, it hopes, it gives the benefit of the doubt. Besides, our careers were soaring. Bruce was bringing in high-profile clients, and I'd been promoted to senior advisor, specializing in wealth preservation strategies for multi-generational families. We were the golden couple of Rossmore Financial, pictured together at charity events and featured in the firm's marketing materials. It was at one of these charity galas, 2 years into our marriage, that I first met Asher Reeves. Tall, quietly, confident, and with none of Bruce's flashy charm, Asher was the chief investment officer at a competing firm. While Bruce networked across the ballroom, Asher and I had ended up in a surprisingly deep conversation about new approaches to sustainable investing. "Your husband seems to know everyone," Asher had observed, watching Bruce work the room with practiced ease. "It's his superpower," I'd replied. "Never met a stranger, never forgot a name." "And what's your superpower, Pia Wilson?" he'd asked, his gaze direct but thoughtful. The question had caught me off guard. In Bruce's orbit, I'd grown accustomed to being introduced as Bruce's wife, who's also a brilliant advisor. Having someone see me as separate, as my own entity with distinct qualities, felt unexpectedly refreshing. "I listen," I'd said finally. "Really listen to what clients need, not just what they say they want." Asher had smiled then, a genuine expression that reached his eyes. "That's rarer than you might think in our industry. Rossmore is lucky to have you." Later that night, as Bruce excitedly recounted his networking conquests in the taxi home, I'd mentioned my conversation with Asher. "Reeves?" Bruce had frowned. "Stone Financial's CIO? What did he want?" The sudden edge in his voice had surprised me. "Nothing. We just talked about ESG investing strategies. He seemed interested in my approach to client needs assessment." "He was fishing for firm information," Bruce had said dismissively. "Those guys are always looking for an edge. Be careful around him." I'd been taken aback by his reaction. "We were just talking shop, Bruce. Professional courtesy." "Professional courtesy," he'd repeated with a hollow laugh. "There's no such thing in this business, Pia. Everyone's either competition or a potential client. Remember that." The exchange had left me unsettled, but I'd chalked it up to the natural rivalry between firms. Only years later would I recognize it as Bruce's first display of the insecurity that festered beneath his confident facade. As we approached our 3rd anniversary, subtle changes began to appear in our routine. Bruce started working later, often coming home after I'd gone to bed. Weekend brunches with friends were increasingly canceled in favor of emergency client meetings. His expense reports, which I used to review as part of our shared financial planning, were suddenly off limits. "It's just boring business stuff," he'd deflect when I asked. "Why waste your brilliant mind on expense receipts when you could be focusing on the Henderson inheritance strategy?" Then came the first unexplained cash withdrawal, $5,000 from our joint account. When I questioned it, Bruce had seemed momentarily startled, then smoothly explained it was for a client appreciation event. "Last-minute opportunity," he'd said, kissing me on the forehead. "Had to move quickly. It's going to bring in huge returns." The event was never mentioned again, and I didn't press. We were both busy with our careers, and our professional trust had always been implicit. Besides, our finances still looked healthy. On paper, increasing salaries, growing investment portfolio, rising property value. If Bruce occasionally made unilateral financial decisions, well, that was a small price to pay for the life we were building together. It was around this time that Bruce suggested we separate our finances a bit more for tax optimization purposes. He would handle the mortgage, car payments, and investments, while I would cover utilities, groceries, and our day-to-day expenses. It seemed logical from a wealth management perspective, and as a financial advisor myself, I appreciated the strategic approach. I didn't realize then that I was being systematically insulated from our true financial picture, that the foundation of our marriage was being built on carefully constructed illusions rather than solid ground. Like the unseen structural damage in a beautiful house, the cracks were there, hidden behind designer fixtures and expensive finishes, but spreading nonetheless. It was a Tuesday evening, 4 years into our marriage, when my world shifted on its axis. I'd come home early, a rare occurrence in our dual-career household, planning to surprise Bruce with dinner from his favorite restaurant. The condo was empty, unusually quiet without Bruce's typical background music or television sports commentary. I was setting the table when I noticed the mail. Bruce normally collected it, sorting through it before I ever saw it. Bills went into buy. His office, catalogs and magazines to the coffee table, junk mail straight to recycling. His system, his domain. But today, the mail sat untouched in a pile on the entryway table. I flipped through it casually, coupon circulars, a home design magazine, a credit card offer, until I reached an official-looking envelope from American Express marked Urgent. Final notice. It was addressed to Bruce, but we'd been married 4 years. There were no secrets between us, or so I believed. The statement inside made my blood run cold. A balance of $42,500. Minimum payment overdue for 3 consecutive months. Threat of legal action if not addressed immediately. My hands shaking, I set it aside and continued through the pile. 2 more credit card statements, a letter from a collections agency, and an envelope from what I recognized as an online sports betting platform. Each revelation was another blow to the foundation of trust I'd built my marriage on. By the time Bruce came home, I had arranged the statements in a neat row on our dining table, the takeout food forgotten and cold in its containers. "What's all this?" he asked, his voice carefully neutral, but I caught the flash of panic in his eyes. "You tell me," I replied, struggling to keep my voice steady. $42,000 on the Amex, $38,000 on the Visa, $23,000 on the Discover, and apparently $15,000 owed to BetRightNow.com. That's over $100,000 in debt I knew nothing about, Bruce. He stood frozen for a moment. Then his shoulders slumped as if someone had cut invisible strings holding him upright. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely audible. "I was going to tell you. Once I had it under control." "Under control?" I echoed in disbelief. "They're threatening legal action. How long has this been going on?" He sank into a chair across from me, running his hands through his hair. "The credit cards? About 2 years. The gambling? Longer. 2 years. 2 years of lies, of hidden statements, of secret financial catastrophe brewing while we lived our seemingly perfect life." "Why?" I asked, the single word containing all my hurt, all my confusion. Bruce's explanation spilled out in a torrent of rationalizations and excuses. It had started small, a few sports bets with clients, a weekend in Vegas that got out of hand. Then, bigger bets to try to win back losses, credit cards to cover the gambling debts, more gambling to try to pay off the credit cards, a vicious cycle that had spiraled far beyond his control. "I kept thinking I could fix it myself," he said, his voice cracking. "One good streak, one big client, and it would all go away. You'd never have to know." "But why hide it from me at all?" I demanded. "I'm a financial advisor, Bruce. Helping people manage money problems is literally what I do for a living." He looked up then, his eyes red-rimmed and haunted. "Because I was supposed to be the successful one, the rising star. How could I tell you that it was all a facade? That half our clients think I'm this financial genius, and I can't even manage my own money." The irony would have been laughable if it weren't so devastating. Bruce Wilson, The man who dazzled wealthy clients with investment strategies and wealth preservation techniques, drowning in consumer debt and gambling losses. We need to tell the firm, I said finally. If this gets out, if clients find out, no, Bruce interrupted, suddenly panicked. They'll fire me on the spot. Financial advisors with gambling addictions don't exactly inspire client confidence. Then what do you suggest? I asked coldly. Because this, I gestured at the statements, isn't going away on its own. Bruce reached across the table, taking my hands in his. I've stopped gambling, I swear. Closed all the accounts 6 weeks ago. I'm getting help. There's a therapist and meetings, but I need time to fix the financial damage. I pulled my hands away, needing physical distance to think clearly. The financial advisor in me was already calculating numbers, our savings, my separate investments, our home equity. The wife in me was still reeling from the betrayal, the years of deception. How much do you make from the Collins account? Bruce asked suddenly. What? The Collins family, your biggest client. What's your annual commission? I stared at him, thrown by the abrupt change in topic. About 90,000. Why? And the Harrington Trust? 65, give or take. Bruce, what are you? That's over 150,000 just from 2 clients, he said, leaning forward intently. If we lived on my salary and used yours to tackle the debt, we could be free in 3 years. Less if we sell some assets. I sat back, stunned by the calculation. You want me to use my entire income to clean up your secret gambling debts? Our debts, he corrected softly. I'm your husband, Pia. For better or worse, remember. I stood up abruptly, needing to move, to think. 4 years of marriage, of building a life together, of planning for a future that suddenly seemed built on quicksand. And yet, beneath my anger and hurt, I could see Bruce's pain, his shame. The man I loved was still there, drowning in the consequences of his own poor choices. 3 months, I said finally, turning to face him. You have 3 months to prove you're serious about recovery. Regular therapy, GA meetings, complete transparency with accounts. If, and only if, I see real change, we'll discuss a plan to tackle the debt together. The relief on Bruce's face was palpable. I won't let you down, I swear. You already have, I replied quietly. This is your chance to rebuild. Don't waste it. That night, as Bruce slept beside me, or pretended to, I stared at the ceiling, running numbers in my head. 100,000 in high-interest debt. Our savings, already depleted to levels I hadn't realized. The mortgage on a property we'd overpaid for in a market that had cooled. It would take sacrifice, discipline, and years of focused effort to dig out from under this mountain of debt. Years of my income going toward mistakes I hadn't made. But when I pictured the alternative, Bruce's career destroyed, our marriage dissolved, the life we'd built together shattered, I knew I would do whatever it took. The next morning, I opened a new spreadsheet and titled it Debt Freedom Plan. It would become my roadmap for the next 3 years, the blueprint for a journey I never expected to take. A journey that would ultimately cost me far more than money. 3 years. 1,095 days of calculated sacrifice. Each month, I watched as nearly every dollar I earned disappeared into the black hole of Bruce's debt. I cut my own expenses to the bone. No more salon visits, lunch from home instead of takeout with colleagues, clothes bought only when absolutely necessary. For 3 years, I lived like a junior analyst while maintaining the polished appearance expected of a senior financial advisor. Through it all, Bruce kept his promises. Therapy twice a week. Gamblers. Anonymous meetings every Tuesday and Thursday evening. Complete transparency with all accounts and spending. He even carried a basic flip phone for the first year, having surrendered his smartphone to remove the temptation of betting apps. "You're saving me," he'd whisper sometimes at night, his arm wrapped around me in the dark. "Not just financially, you're saving my life." In those moments, the sacrifice felt worth it. Not easy, but worth it. We were fighting together for our future, for Bruce's recovery, for the life we'd originally envisioned. Or so I believed. The debt disappeared steadily, like snow melting in spring. First the highest interest credit cards, then the collection, accounts, then the remaining balances. I tracked our progress obsessively, updating my spreadsheet after each payment, watching the numbers tick downward month by month. Bruce contributed too, funneling bonuses and any extra income directly to the debt. He sold his expensive watches, the sports memorabilia he'd collected, even the luxury car he'd leased in our first year of marriage. He embraced frugality with the same intensity he'd once brought to gambling, as if replacing one obsession with another. Our marriage changed during those years, in some ways for the better. The forced financial transparency meant we talked more openly about money than we ever had. Sunday mornings became financial planning time, where we'd review the previous week's spending and adjust our budgets for the coming month. Bruce became an expert in finding free community events, discount restaurant nights, creative date ideas that cost nothing but meant everything. "This is actually making us stronger," Bruce said one evening as we walked along the waterfront. A free concert, playing in the distance. "We're more of a team now than when we were spending without thinking." I wanted to believe him. In many ways, it was true. The crisis had forced a level of honesty and communication we'd never achieved in the early, more carefree years of our marriage. Without the distraction of material luxuries, we'd rediscovered simpler pleasures: cooking together, hiking in nearby state parks, game nights with friends who didn't mind that we brought homemade snacks instead of expensive wine. At work, our professional momentum continued despite our private financial struggles. I was named Advisor of the Year for my work with the Collins family's complex estate planning needs. Bruce was praised for his client retention rates and innovative investment strategies. We maintained the public image of success while privately crawling out of a financial pit. Then came the day I'd been working toward for 3 long years. It was a Thursday evening, and I'd just completed the final payment on the last credit card. As the confirmation appeared on my screen, an unexpected wave of emotion washed over me: relief, pride, and something else I couldn't quite identify. Closure, perhaps, or maybe just exhaustion. Bruce came home to find me sitting at the kitchen table, staring at my laptop, a single glass of champagne, the expensive bottle I'd been saving for exactly this moment, poured and waiting. "What's the occasion?" he asked, setting down his briefcase. I turned the screen toward him silently. The payment confirmation, and below it, my meticulously maintained spreadsheet, every debt category now showing zeros across the board. His eyes widened as understanding dawned. We're done? It's all gone?" I nodded, a smile spreading across my face as his reaction mirrored my own feelings. "As of 20 minutes ago, we are officially debt-free." Bruce crossed the room in 3 long strides, pulling me to my feet and into a tight embrace. "You did it," he murmured into my hair. "You actually did it." "We did it," I corrected, pulling back to look at him. "It was a team effort." He poured himself a glass of champagne, his hand slightly unsteady with emotion, and raised it in a toast. "To my incredible wife, who stood by me when I didn't deserve it. To new beginnings and second chances." We clinked glasses, both of us teary-eyed. The weight that had pressed down on us for 3 years suddenly lifted, leaving a strange lightness in its wake. "So what now?" Bruce asked, setting down his glass. "What's the plan for all that income you've been throwing at my mistakes?" I smiled, excited to finally share the ideas I'd been quietly developing. "First, we rebuild our emergency fund. 6 months of expenses minimum. Then we max out our retirement contributions. We've fallen behind on those. After that, I hesitated, suddenly nervous about voicing the dream I'd been nurturing. I've been thinking about starting my own advisory practice, something small at first, focused on women in transition, divorcees, widows, career changers. Bruce's eyebrows shot up. Your own firm? Wow, that's a big step. It's just an idea right now, I said quickly. Something to consider down the road. For now, I'm just happy we can start building instead of digging out. He nodded, but something in his expression had shifted. A fleeting shadow I couldn't quite interpret. We should celebrate properly, he said, his familiar enthusiasm returning. Dinner at Maison Laurent this weekend. My treat. I've been saving my commission from the Patterson account for something special. I hesitated, the frugal habits of the past 3 years hard to shake. That's so expensive. Exactly, Bruce said, his smile dazzling. We deserve this, Pia. One perfect night to mark the end of our financial nightmare and the beginning of the life we were always meant to have. How? Could I argue with that? After 3 years of sacrifice, one extravagant dinner seemed like a reasonable indulgence. Besides, there was something wonderfully symbolic about returning to the restaurant where Bruce had proposed, now on solid financial ground, instead of the debt-fueled illusion we'd been living in back then. That Saturday night was magical. A 7-course tasting menu, wine pairings selected by the sommelier, attentive service that made us feel like the only diners in the crowded restaurant. Bruce was at his charming best, regaling me with client stories I hadn't heard, making plans for weekend trips we could finally afford, his eyes bright with possibilities. I've been thinking, he said as we lingered over dessert. Maybe it's time to look at starting a family. The suggestion caught me by surprise. We'd put those discussions on hold during the debt repayment years, both agreeing that children shouldn't enter the picture until our financial situation was stable. Really? You feel ready for that? Bruce reached across the table for my hand. I've never been more ready. We're financially secure, our careers are thriving, and after what we've been through, I know we can handle anything together. In that moment, everything felt perfect. The elegant restaurant, the delicious food, the beautiful man across from me who had faced his demons and emerged stronger. The future stretched before us, bright with promise and possibility. It was exactly 1 week before my world collapsed. The first hint that something had shifted came 3 days after our celebration dinner. I was working late, finishing a complex estate plan for a client, when my phone buzzed with a text from Bruce. Working late. Don't wait up. Simple enough, and certainly not unusual in our industry. Yet something about it triggered a faint unease. Perhaps it was the timing. Bruce had mentioned a light week ahead during our weekend dinner. Or perhaps it was just that after 3 years of hypervigilance about our finances and Bruce's activities, any deviation from the expected registered more strongly with me. I sent back a quick, "Okay, see you at home," and tried to refocus on my work. But the nagging feeling persisted, a small stone in my shoe that I couldn't quite shake out. When I finally got home around 9, the condo was dark and empty. I heated up leftovers, checked emails, and was in bed reading when Bruce finally came, home just after 11. He smelled faintly of alcohol and expensive perfume. Not cologne, definitely perfume. "Good meeting?" I asked casually as he undressed. Oh yeah, the Stevenson account. They're considering a significant portfolio restructuring." He headed for the shower without elaborating further. I lay there, book forgotten in my hands, trying to place why this felt off. Bruce typically loved discussing client meetings, especially successful ones. He'd break down the strategies proposed, the client reactions, the next steps, sometimes in exhausting detail. This brief, almost dismissive response was out of character. 3. Stevenson account. I tried to recall which client that was and came up blank. After years of sharing client stories and strategies, I thought I knew all of Bruce's significant clients by name. When he emerged from the shower, I decided to probe, gently. So tell me about the Stevensons. New clients? Bruce paused briefly before sliding into bed beside me. Not exactly. They've been with the firm for years, but recently transferred to my portfolio. High net worth family, made their money in tech, looking for more aggressive growth strategies. The details spilled out smoothly, professionally, perhaps too professionally, as if reciting a client profile rather than recounting an actual meeting. I nodded, letting it drop. But that night, I slept fitfully, troubled by something I couldn't quite articulate. The next morning, I noticed Bruce checking his phone more frequently than usual, angling the screen away slightly whenever I came near. When I entered our home office to retrieve some documents, he quickly switched browser tabs. Small things. Possibly meaningless. But they registered, little data points collecting in the back of my mind. That Friday, I stopped by Carol's desk to discuss a client referral. Carol had been with the firm for over 20 years, serving as executive assistant to 3 different senior partners before being assigned exclusively to Bruce when he made junior partner. If anyone knew Bruce's client list inside and out, it was Carol. Quick question, I said after we'd handled the referral paperwork. The Stevenson account. Do they prefer communication by phone or email? Bruce was telling me about their portfolio, restructuring, and I had some thoughts I wanted to pass along. Carol's brow furrowed slightly. Stevenson? I don't think we have a client by that name. My stomach tightened, but I kept my expression neutral. Really? Bruce mentioned meeting with them Wednesday evening. A tech family? Carol shook her head, tapping at her keyboard. Let me check to be certain, but I don't recognize the name, and I handle all of Bruce's client correspondence. After a moment, she confirmed, no Stevensons in our system. Perhaps he meant Stevenson, the retirement planning couple from Westbrook? That must be it, I said lightly. My mistake. But it wasn't a mistake, and we both knew it. Carol had been at Rossmore long enough to recognize the signs of a senior advisor with something to hide. Her expression was carefully blank, but her eyes held a mixture of concern and something that looked uncomfortably like pity. That evening, I checked our joint credit card statement online, a habit formed during our debt repayment years that I'd continued out of diligence. There, dated Wednesday night, was a charge from the Gramercy Hotel bar for $175. Not astronomical, but definitely more than a casual business drink. And definitely not disclosed by Bruce. I closed the laptop, unsure of my next move. The financial advisor in me wanted facts, data, concrete evidence before jumping to conclusions. The wife in me was already cycling through scenarios, each more painful than the last. For the next week, I watched and waited, alert to every small inconsistency in Bruce's behavior. The late nights increased in frequency. The vague explanations about client meetings became a pattern. Twice more, I confirmed that the clients he named didn't exist in our firm's roster. Then came the credit card statements. A jewelry store charge for $3,200, a restaurant I knew to be one of the most expensive in the city. A weekend charge at a boutique hotel in wine country when Bruce had claimed to be at a men's retreat with colleagues. Meanwhile, Bruce's behavior, at home, oscillated between distant and overly attentive. Some nights he barely spoke, absorbed in his phone or claiming exhaustion. Other nights he'd bring home expensive gifts, a designer scarf I'd mentioned liking months ago, artisanal chocolates, from a shop across town, premium tickets to a show I'd expressed interest in. What's the occasion? I'd asked when he presented the theater tickets. Do I need an occasion to spoil my amazing wife? He'd responded, kissing me with an intensity that felt almost desperate. After everything you've done for us, for me, you deserve to be celebrated. The gifts, the sudden romantic gestures, they should have been sweet, reassuring. Instead, they triggered memories of my father's warning signs, echoes of financial psychology I'd observed in clients caught in cycles of guilt and compensation. One evening, I arrived home to find Bruce in the kitchen, preparing an elaborate dinner, an expensive bottle of wine already breathing on the counter. "Special dinner for my special woman," he announced, coming over to kiss me. "I thought we deserved a night in." I smiled, dropping my briefcase by the door. "Looks wonderful. Let me just change quickly." In our bedroom, I set down my purse and noticed Bruce's suit jacket draped over the chair. Almost without conscious thought, I reached into the inside pocket and found a small velvet box. Inside was a pair of diamond stud earrings that probably cost more than our monthly mortgage payment. I closed the box and returned it exactly as I'd found it, my heart pounding. This surge in spending, these lavish gifts, where was the money coming from? We had rebuilt some savings since paying off the debt, but nowhere near enough to justify these extravagances. Was Bruce gambling again? Had he opened new credit accounts I wasn't aware of? Or was there another explanation, one I couldn't bring myself to fully articulate even in the privacy of my own thoughts? That night, as we ate the gourmet meal Bruce had prepared, I maintained the performance of normalcy, smiling, discussing work, complimenting his cooking. But behind my pleasant facade, my mind was cataloging evidence, analyzing patterns, preparing for what increasingly seemed like an inevitable confrontation. The next morning, I made a decision. I left for work. Early, telling Bruce I had a breakfast meeting with a client. Instead, I drove to a small coffee shop across town, opened my laptop, and began a methodical investigation into our current financial situation. All accounts, all credit cards, all investments. If something was wrong, I would find it in the numbers. I always did. What I discovered made my blood run cold. The numbers didn't lie. They never did. That was what I loved about finance. The clarity, the objectivity, the irrefutable truth of mathematics. And what the numbers told me that morning in the coffee shop was a story of betrayal so complete, it left me physically ill. First, there were the new credit accounts. 3 of them, opened within weeks after our final debt payment. Already, they carried balances totaling nearly $30,000. The purchases matched the pattern I'd observed. Jewelry, high-end restaurants, hotel stays, clothing from designers I'd never even consider on my budget. Then there were the cash withdrawals. From Bruce's personal account, $1,000 here, $2,000 there, adding up to over $15,000 in the last month alone. Money that had appeared briefly in our joint savings account, the contributions I'd proudly noted in my budget tracking, only to be transferred to Bruce's separate account and then vanish. But most damning of all was the revelation that came when I logged into our investment portfolio. The celebration fund we'd started building after clearing the debt, intended for a future down payment on a house, for starting a family, for my dream of launching my own practice, had been nearly emptied. Over $40,000 gone, with transfer records, showing the money had been moved to an account I didn't recognize. I stared at the screen, my coffee growing cold beside me, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The sheer magnitude of the deception was staggering. This wasn't a momentary weakness, a single poor decision. This was systematic, calculated, and ongoing. My phone buzzed with a text from Bruce. "Hope your meeting's going well. Dinner at home tonight? I have news to share." News to share. My hand shook as I set the phone down without responding. I paid for my coffee and drove to the office on autopilot, my mind racing through possibilities. I needed more information before confronting Bruce. I needed to understand the full extent of what I was dealing with. At the office, I went through the motions of my workday: client calls, portfolio reviews, team meetings, all while feeling like I was watching myself from a distance. During a break between appointments, I made a single phone call to a contact at American Express, a former client who had once offered assistance if I ever needed a professional favor. By late afternoon, I had what I needed: detailed statements for the new cards, complete with itemized purchases and exact locations. I left the office early, telling my assistant I wasn't feeling well. It wasn't a lie. My stomach was in knots, my head pounding with tension. I drove not to our condo, but to the Gramercy Hotel, where Bruce had charged that $175 bar tab the previous week. The high-end hotel with its discreet staff and luxurious amenities was exactly the sort of place a man with something to hide would choose. At the reception desk, I smiled my most professional smile. "Good afternoon. I believe my husband may have left his wallet in your restaurant last night. Bruce Wilson. He's a regular at your establishment." The young woman at the desk brightened with recognition. "Oh, Mr. Wilson, of course. I don't have any reports of a lost wallet, but I can check with the restaurant staff." "That would be wonderful," I said, maintaining my composure through sheer force of will. He mentioned he was with a client, a Ms. Emma, I believe. Perhaps they turned it in together. The receptionist's smile faltered slightly, a flicker of unease crossing her face. I'm not sure about that. Mr. Wilson usually visits with Ms. Crawford. Emma Crawford. They're in our system as regular guests?" Regular guests. The words landed like physical blows. Not just drinks at the bar, then. Not just professional meetings. Regular guests. "I see," I managed, my voice surprisingly steady. "And would they have been here last night? Around 8? The receptionist glanced at her computer, then back at me with growing discomfort. "I'm really not supposed to. That is, guest privacy. Is. Of course," I interrupted smoothly. "I completely understand. Thank you for your help with the wallet. I'll have my husband call directly if it turns up." Back in my car, I sat motionless, hands gripping the steering wheel. Emma Crawford. The name meant nothing to me, but a quick social media search on my phone revealed everything I needed to know. Young, at least 10 years younger than Bruce and me. Stunningly beautiful, with the carefully curated online presence of someone very invested in appearances. Her profile filled with photos at exclusive restaurants, exotic vacation spots, designer shopping bags, and luxury car interiors. A lifestyle that seemed to have accelerated dramatically in recent months. A lifestyle that my husband was apparently funding. I drove home in a fog of numbness, trying to decide what to do with this information. Confront Bruce immediately? Gather more evidence? Consult a lawyer? The rational part of my brain, the financial advisor who counseled clients through emotional financial decisions daily, was completely offline, overwhelmed by the personal devastation. When I arrived home, the condo was filled with the aroma of cooking food. Bruce stood in the kitchen, stirring something on the stove, music playing softly in the background. The domestic scene was so jarringly at odds with what I'd just discovered that for a moment I wondered if I'd imagined the whole thing, if the entire day had been some kind of stress-induced hallucination. "There you are," Bruce said, looking up with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. I was starting to worry. "You didn't answer my text." "Meeting ran long," I said, the lie coming easily. "What's all this?" "Celebrating," Bruce said, pouring me a glass of wine and holding it out. "I have some exciting news." I accepted the wine automatically, not drinking. "What news?" Bruce's smile widened, but there was something strained about it, a brittleness around the edges. "I've been approached about a major career opportunity, a position with Crawford Investments, small boutique firm, very exclusive client list, double my current salary plus profit sharing. Crawford." The name hit me like a slap. Not a coincidence, not even close. "Crawford," I repeated. "As in Emma Crawford?" The change in Bruce's expression would have been comical under different circumstances. Shock, then calculation, then a rapid shift to cautious neutrality. "You know Emma?" "Not personally," I said, setting down the untouched wine. "But I know she's a regular guest with you at the Gramercy. I know you've spent thousands on jewelry and dinners for her." I know you've been systematically draining our savings to fund your affair. Did I miss anything important? Bruce's mask of composure slipped, replaced by defensive anger. You've been spying on me? Checking up on my whereabouts? Investigating my spending? It's called due diligence, I replied, my voice cold. Something I should have maintained throughout our marriage, apparently. He ran a hand through his hair, agitation replacing anger. It's not what you think, Pia. Emma's father owns Crawford Investments. This relationship, it's professional networking. The spending, the meetings, it's all about securing this opportunity. For us. The desperate lie hung in the air between us, as insubstantial as smoke. I almost pitied him for thinking I would believe it, for underestimating me so completely. Stop, I said quietly. Just stop. I've seen the hotel charges, Bruce. The weekend getaways when you were supposedly at conferences. The jewelry that never made it to my jewelry box. Bruce's shoulders slumped, the pretense evaporating. It just happened. Pia, I didn't plan it. Emma was a client referral, and we got talking, and… When? I interrupted. When did it start? He hesitated, and in that hesitation, I saw the final devastating truth. Before the debt was paid off, I said, the realization solidifying as I spoke. That's why you suddenly became so interested in our financial progress. Not because you were committed to our recovery, but because you needed to know exactly when you'd be free to leave. Bruce didn't deny it. He didn't say anything at all. 3 years, I whispered, my voice catching. 3 years I spent fixing your mistakes, paying your debts, believing we were building something together. And all that time you were just waiting for the right moment to walk away. Bruce was gone by morning. No dramatic midnight exodus. No shouting match that would alert the neighbors to our disintegrating marriage. In the end, it was coldly, efficiently pragmatic, like a business transaction being closed out. I'll stay at Clyde's tonight, he'd said, packing a small bag while I sat motionless on the edge of our bed. Give us both some space to think. Space to think. As if there was anything left to consider, any possible explanation that could justify what he'd done. I didn't cry until after he left. Then the tears came in a flood, great heaving sobs that left me gasping for breath, curled into a ball on the bedroom floor. 3 years of sacrifice, of believing in our shared future, of holding our marriage together through the hardest times. All of it meaningless, a foundation built on quicksand. When the tears finally subsided, I found myself surrounded by the ruins of what I'd thought was my life. Our condo, with its carefully chosen furnishings and framed photos of happier times, now felt like a museum to a relationship that had never really existed as I'd understood it. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I moved through the rooms like a ghost, touching objects, remembering moments, trying to identify exactly when everything had started to go wrong. Had there been signs I'd missed? Red flags I'd ignored? Or had Bruce simply been that good at deception, maintaining the elaborate facade of a committed husband while systematically planning his escape? Morning brought no clarity, only exhaustion, and a hollowness that seemed to consume me from the inside out. I called in sick to work, something I'd done perhaps 3 times in my entire career, and spent the day in a fog of disbelief and pain. Bruce texted once, "I'm giving you space, but we should talk when you're ready. There's more to explain." I didn't respond. What could he possibly say that would matter now? By the second day, the initial shock had begun to crystallize into something harder, colder. I forced myself to shower, to eat something, to approach the situation with the analytical mindset that had served me well professionally. This was a problem to solve, a challenge to overcome. I would treat it like any financial crisis, assess the damage, identify resources, develop a strategy for recovery. I called our bank and credit card companies, removing Bruce's access to our joint accounts. I contacted a lawyer specializing in divorce, setting up a consultation for the following day. I began cataloging our assets, documenting the financial evidence of Bruce's betrayal. Every action was mechanical, methodical, a distraction from the emotional devastation lurking just beneath the surface. On the third day, I returned to work, armor of professionalism firmly in place. I smiled at colleagues, discussed client portfolios, attended department meetings, all while feeling completely disconnected from the woman going through these motions. No one seemed to notice anything amiss, or if they did, they attributed it to normal work stress. No one except Carol, who appeared at my office door late that afternoon, quietly closing it behind her. "Bruce hasn't been in for 3 days," she said without preamble. "He's not answering emails or calls. The Peterson client has been trying to reach him about their portfolio restructuring." I looked up from my computer, meeting her concerned gaze. "Bruce and I are separating," I said, the words sounding strange in my own ears, as if someone else was speaking them. "He's staying with Clyde for now. I expect he'll return to work when he's sorted himself out." Carol nodded, unsurprised. I was afraid something like this might happen when I saw the charges on his corporate card. The gifts, the hotels. She hesitated, then added softly, "The receipts for 2 everywhere he went." "You knew," I said. Not a question, but a realization. "You knew about Emma Crawford." "I suspected," she corrected. "Bruce has been careful, but I've been an executive assistant for 25 years. I notice patterns." She placed a folder on my desk. "These are copies of everything I've documented over the past 2 months. Personal expenses charged to corporate accounts, client meetings that never happened, time billed that doesn't align with his actual whereabouts. You might need it." I stared at the folder, then back at Carol, stunned by this unexpected alliance. "Why are you helping me?" Carol's expression softened with something like compassion. "Because I watched you work, yourself to the bone paying off his debts. Because I've seen too many men like Bruce walk away from the wreckage they create without consequences. And because 20 years ago, I was you. Different circumstances. Same devastation." After she left, I sat motionless, the folder untouched, on my desk. I had expected to face this alone, to navigate the dissolution of my marriage in the same isolation with which I'd handled so many other challenges. The simple act of kindness, of recognition and solidarity, from Carol cracked something in the careful shell I'd constructed around my emotions. That evening, alone in the condo that no longer felt like home, I finally allowed myself to feel the full weight of what had happened. Not just the betrayal, but the loss of the future I'd believed in, the family we'd talked about starting, the life we'd planned together. I grieved not only for the relationship, but for the woman I had been, trusting, devoted, certain of her place in the world. The next morning, my phone rang just as I was preparing to leave for work. Bruce's name on the screen, the first actual call since he'd walked out. For a moment, I considered ignoring it, but some need for closure, or perhaps just morbid curiosity, made me answer. "Pia." Bruce's voice was strained, nervous. "We need to talk. About the condo, about our accounts. Emma and you," I repeated, a hollow laugh escaping me. "Already a unit. How convenient." "It's not like that," he protested. "It's complicated." "Actually, it's very simple," I said, surprising myself with the steadiness of my voice. "You betrayed me in every possible way. You lied. You cheated. You stole from our future to fund your affair. There's nothing complicated about it. Look, I know you're angry." "Angry doesn't begin to cover it, Bruce. But that's not actually your problem anymore. My feelings stopped being your concern the moment you decided our marriage was disposable." There was a pause. Then Bruce's voice, again this time with an edge of impatience. "Fine, be emotional about it if you want. But we still need to discuss practical matters. The condo, the investments you've already emptied, I interrupted. Or the new credit card debt you've accumulated. Which practical matters did you want to discuss specifically? Another pause, longer this time. What do you mean, emptied? I only transferred some funds. $40,000, Bruce. Our entire celebration fund. The money we were saving for our future. I needed it for the opportunity with Crawford Investments, he said quickly. It's a buy-in position. Partner. Track from day one. Once the paperwork is finalized, I'll replace the funds with interest. The audacity, the sheer entitlement in his voice triggered something in me. Not the tears I'd expected, but a cold, clear anger that was almost energizing. There won't be any position at Crawford Investments, I said calmly. Or anywhere else. In this city, once the compliance department at Rossmore receives the documentation of your corporate card misuse, client billing fraud, and ethical violations. Carol has been quite thorough in her record keeping. The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. You wouldn't, Bruce finally said. That would destroy my career. Everything we've built. I didn't destroy anything, Bruce. You did that all by yourself. I ended the call and stood in the middle of my living room, shaking with adrenaline, but oddly clear-headed. For the first time since discovering Bruce's betrayal, I felt something other than devastation. I felt powerful. 3 weeks after Bruce walked out, I found myself sitting alone on my balcony at dawn, watching the city slowly come alive below. Sleep had become elusive, my mind constantly cycling through memories, calculations, and plans. But that morning was different. Instead of the familiar weight of betrayal and loss, I felt something unexpected. A curious lightness, a sense of possibility I hadn't experienced in years. The realization struck me with surprising clarity. I was free. Not just from a faithless husband or the burden of his debts, but from the constant compromise that had defined our relationship. For years, I had unconsciously diminished myself, my ambitions, my needs, my very identity, to maintain the equilibrium of our marriage. I had been the responsible one, the steady one, the one who fixed problems rather than creating them. And in return, I'd received betrayal so complete it had shattered the foundation of the life I thought I was building. My phone buzzed with a text from Bruce. Meeting with lawyer today. Need to discuss division of assets. When can we talk? I set the phone down without responding. Division of assets. As if our relationship could be reduced to columns in a spreadsheet, debts and credits to be balanced. Although in truth, that's exactly what it had become long before Emma Crawford entered the picture. Inside, I opened my laptop and pulled up the document I'd been working on for the past week. A detailed financial plan, not for a client, but for myself. It laid out every aspect of my current situation and projected 5 years forward. Income, expenses, investments, retirement planning. For the first time in my adult life, I was making financial decisions based solely on my own needs and goals. And there, in black and white, was the truth I had been avoiding. Staying in the condo didn't make financial sense. It had been Bruce's choice, not mine. Too expensive, too flashy, too much a statement of success rather than a true home. Without the burden of his debt, without the need to maintain appearances for his sake, I could choose something that actually suited me. My phone rang. Bruce again, impatient for a response. I silenced it and continued reviewing my plan. The final section, titled Professional Development, contained the seed of an idea that had been growing since the day Bruce left, establishing my own financial advisory practice. Not someday, not eventually, not when the timing was right or when Bruce thought it was a good idea. Now. Because if the past 3 weeks had taught me anything, it was that waiting for the right time was just another way of giving away my power. A knock at my door startled me from my thoughts. Through the peephole, I saw Asher Reeves, the chief investment officer from Stone Financial who I'd met at that charity gala years ago. The man Bruce had warned me against speaking to. Asher, I said, opening the door in surprise. What are you doing here? He looked slightly embarrassed, holding a folder in one hand. I'm sorry to drop by unannounced. Carol from your office gave me your address. She thought you might be interested in this. He held out the folder. Stone Financial is launching a new division focused on women in transition, divorce, widowhood, career change. Given your expertise in this area, we'd like to discuss the possibility of you heading it up. I stared at him, momentarily speechless. You're offering me a job? More than a job, Asher clarified. A partnership, your own division, your own client approach, backed by our resources and infrastructure. Carol mentioned you've been considering starting your own practice. This would give you that independence without the startup costs and risks. I invited him in, my mind racing. This was exactly the opportunity I'd dreamed of. The chance to work with the clients I felt most passionately about helping. Women navigating financial transitions much like the one I was experiencing myself. As Asher outlined the details of the offer, I felt a surge of excitement I hadn't experienced in years. This wasn't just a job opportunity. It was a lifeline being extended at exactly the right moment, a bridge to the future I'd been trying to envision for myself. Why me? I asked finally. We've only met briefly, and I'm currently dealing with a rather messy personal situation. Asher's expression was serious. Precisely because of that personal situation. You understand these clients' needs firsthand, and your reputation in the industry speaks for itself. Your client retention rates, your approach to intergenerational planning. The fact that you're going through your own transition makes you more valuable to us, not less. After he left, I stood in my living room, the offer letter in my hands, feeling something shift irrevocably within me. The woman who had devoted years to fixing Bruce's mistakes, who had subordinated her dreams to his needs, was gone. In her place stood someone stronger, clearer, and suddenly certain of her path forward. I picked up my phone and composed a text to Bruce. All communication through lawyers from now on. I know exactly what I'm worth. I gave myself exactly 1 week to decide on Asher's offer. In that time, I approached the opportunity with the same methodical analysis I would apply to any major financial decision for a client. First, I created a comprehensive inventory of my current assets and liabilities. The condo had equity, despite Bruce's inflated claims about its investment potential. My retirement accounts remained intact, protected by my insistence years ago that we maintain separate long-term investments. My emergency fund, a small secret account I'd started during our debt repayment years, contained enough to support me for 3 months if necessary. On the liability side, there were the joint credit cards Bruce had recently maxed out, our shared mortgage, and the emotional debt of a failed marriage. The latter couldn't be quantified, but it weighed heavily in every calculation. Next, I assessed my strengths and weaknesses in this new landscape. My professional reputation remained strong. If anything, colleagues seemed to respect how I was, handling the personal crisis with dignity. My client relationships were solid. Several had specifically reached out to confirm I would continue managing their accounts regardless of my marital status. My network, I realized with some surprise, was actually more extensive than I'd given myself credit for. Beyond Carol's unexpected advocacy, I'd received supportive messages from industry contacts, former clients, even competitors who'd heard rumors of my situation. Years of quiet competence and ethical practice had built a foundation of professional goodwill I hadn't fully appreciated. My primary weakness was psychological. The lingering impact of betrayal, the shaken confidence, the still raw emotions that occasionally ambushed me in unguarded moments. There was also the practical reality of starting over at 35, rebuilding a personal life from scratch while simultaneously navigating a career transition. With this assessment complete, I turned my attention to the Stone Financial offer. Itself, comparing it against my original dream of an independent practice. The partnership Asher proposed would provide immediate infrastructure, an established brand, and financial stability during my personal transition. The division focusing on women in financial transition aligned perfectly with my professional passions. The terms were generous, base salary comparable to my current position, with significant upside potential through client acquisition bonuses and partnership profit sharing. The alternative, launching my own practice from scratch, offered complete autonomy but also greater risk, especially given my current emotional state and the financial implications of my impending divorce. The startup costs alone would deplete most of my liquid assets, leaving little margin for error in those crucial first months. I created a decision matrix, weighing each option against my core priorities: financial security, professional growth, work-life balance, and long-term independence. By every objective measure, the Stone Financial Partnership emerged as the superior choice, at least for now. But there was one more factor to consider: Bruce's potential reaction and interference. As a competitor in the same market, he could attempt to undermine my client relationships or spread rumors damaging to my professional reputation. I needed to anticipate and neutralize these threats. I arranged a meeting with my divorce attorney, bringing along Carol's documentation of Bruce's professional misconduct. We discussed strategy, not just for the division of assets, but for protecting my career during the separation. This evidence of corporate card misuse and billing fraud, my attorney said, reviewing Carol's meticulous records. It's compelling. We could use it as leverage in settlement negotiations. I don't want to destroy his career, I clarified. I just need insurance that he won't interfere with mine. She nodded. A mutual non-disparagement clause in the divorce agreement then, with financial penalties if breached, and we make it clear that these documents remain sealed only if he cooperates fully in the divorce proceedings and respects your professional boundaries moving forward. With that protection strategy in place, I turn to my final concern: Emma Crawford. Through discreet inquiries, I confirmed what I had suspected. She was the daughter of Robert Crawford, founder of Crawford Investments, the firm Bruce claimed to be joining as a partner. However, industry contacts indicated no such position had been announced or was forthcoming. Another of Bruce's fabrications, it seemed, designed to justify his betrayal with a narrative of professional advancement. More tellingly, Emma's social media activity had shifted in recent days. The lavish posts documenting expensive gifts and luxury experiences had been replaced by cryptic quotes about toxic relationships and moving on. The timing suggested that Bruce's financial utility might be diminishing in proportion to his diminishing access to our joint resources. On Friday evening, exactly 1 week after receiving Asher's offer, I called him to accept the position. The following Monday morning, I submitted my resignation to Rossmore Financial, effective 2 weeks later. I didn't speak to Bruce directly, but I made sure the news would reach him through professional channels, establishing the new reality on my terms. The assessment was complete, the decision made, the strategy set in motion. For the first time since Bruce walked out, I felt not just empowered but energized. This wasn't just a recovery plan. It was the blueprint for a future better than anything I had imagined during my marriage. My first month at Stone Financial passed in a blur of new routines, client introductions, and strategic planning sessions. Asher had been true to his word. I was given complete autonomy to design the new division focusing on women in financial transition. It was exhilarating and exhausting, the perfect counterbalance to the ongoing stress of divorce proceedings. We need a name for the division, Asher said during one of our planning meetings. Something that captures the essence of what you're building. I'd been considering this question for weeks. Phoenix Financial, I said without hesitation. For women rising from the ashes of major life transitions? Asher smiled. Personal experience informing professional vision. Perfect. The name resonated on multiple levels. For my clients, it represented the possibility of rebirth after loss. For me, it was a daily reminder of my own ongoing transformation. With the division named, I turned to developing its core offerings. Drawing on my own recent experiences, I identified 3 critical areas where women in transition needed specialized support first, immediate financial triage, assessing the current situation, identifying vulnerabilities, and implementing protective measures. This was the stage where many women felt most overwhelmed and vulnerable to poor decisions. Second, strategic rebuilding, creating a tailored financial plan that accounted for the emotional reality of transition while establishing concrete steps toward stability and growth. Third, long-term empowerment, providing the education, tools, and ongoing support needed for sustained financial independence. For each stage, I designed specialized services, educational resources, and support systems. I brought in experts in related fields, divorce attorneys, therapists specializing in grief and transition, career counselors, to create a holistic approach that addressed the complex interplay between financial and emotional well-being. "This is revolutionary," Asher commented after reviewing my comprehensive proposal. "You're not just offering financial advice, you're creating a pathway to genuine transformation." "It's what I needed and couldn't find," I replied simply. The best innovations often come from personal necessity. As the professional pieces fell into place, I turned my attention to my personal restructuring. The divorce was proceeding, though Bruce had initially attempted to contest the division of assets I'd proposed. He claims he's entitled to half the value of your retirement accounts, my attorney reported during one of our strategy sessions, despite the fact that his own accounts were emptied to fund his affair. "What's our counter?" I asked. "We're documenting every penny you contributed to his debt repayment over those 3 years. When calculated with appropriate interest, it actually exceeds his claimed share of your retirement savings. Plus, with the evidence of his financial misconduct," she shrugged. "His attorney will advise him to settle once they review our full documentation." She was right. Within weeks, Bruce's objections were withdrawn, and we moved toward a settlement that was, if not amicable, at least expedient. The condo would be sold, with proceeds divided after accounting for my disproportionate contributions to the mortgage. Our remaining joint assets would be liquidated and distributed based on a formula that recognized my payments toward Bruce's gambling debts. With the financial aspects of the divorce moving toward resolution, I focused on creating physical distance from the memories that still haunted me. I found a small but elegant apartment in a different neighborhood, far from the condo Bruce and I had shared. The monthly rent was significantly less than our mortgage had been, allowing me to rebuild my savings more quickly. The process of downsizing was unexpectedly liberating. Each item from my marriage required a decision: keep, donate, or discard. Furniture that had been chosen to impress others rather than provide comfort was sold. Wedding photos and mementos were packed away, not destroyed, but removed from daily view. Clothes I'd purchased to fit Bruce's image of a successful financial advisor's wife were donated to a program helping women re-enter the workforce after domestic crises. What remained was carefully selected to create a space that reflected the woman I was becoming rather than the wife I had been. Clean lines, calming colors, practical luxury rather than showy extravagance. A home, office designed for productivity rather than appearances. Bookshelves filled with professional resources and literature I'd always meant to read but never found time for during my marriage. As I arranged these carefully curated possessions in my new apartment, I realized I was doing more than decorating a space. I was creating a physical manifestation of my internal transformation. Each object had purpose, meaning, value beyond its appearance. Nothing was chosen to impress others or maintain a facade. On the evening I officially moved in, I stood in the center of my new living room, a glass of champagne in hand. The space felt nothing like the condo I'd shared with Bruce. It was smaller, simpler, but infinitely more authentic. For the first time in months, I felt completely at home. I raised my glass in a silent toast, to plans taking shape, to phoenixes rising, to the unexpected gift of starting over. The launch of Phoenix Financial was scheduled for early October, timed to coincide with Financial Planning Month, a perfect hook for media coverage and public awareness campaigns. By late September, everything seemed on track. Marketing materials approved, website ready to launch, initial consultations booked with prospective clients. I had even been invited to speak at a women's leadership conference, an opportunity to introduce the new division to exactly the audience we hoped to reach. Then came the first setback. "We need to talk," Asher said, appearing at my office door, with an expression that immediately triggered my concern. "There's been an issue with some of your former clients." He closed the door and handed me a printout of an email that had been sent to several of my high-net-worth clients from Rossmore Financial. It contained thinly veiled insinuations about my professional judgment being compromised by personal circumstances and suggested clients might want to review their options before following me to my new position. "How many clients received this?" I asked, my voice steady despite the anger building inside me. "From what we can tell, all of the clients you directly managed at Rossmore," Asher replied. "And it's having an effect. 3 of the major accounts you expected to bring over have already called to cancel their preliminary consultations." I stared at the email, recognizing Bruce's influence, if not his direct authorship. The careful wording managed to raise doubts, without making any specific accusations that could be clearly refuted. It was calculated character assassination disguised as professional concern. "This violates the non-disparagement clause in our separation agreement," I said, reaching for my phone to call my attorney. "There's more," Asher continued, looking uncomfortable. "Robert Crawford, Emma's father, sits on the board of the Women's Leadership Conference. Your speaking invitation has been rescinded." This hit harder than the email campaign. The conference would have provided immediate visibility and credibility for Phoenix Financial among exactly the client base we were targeting. Without it, our launch would be significantly diminished. "Bruce," I said, the name like ashes in my mouth. "He's using Emma's connections to block me professionally." Asher nodded grimly. "It appears so. The question is, how do we respond?" Over the next few days, more clients withdrew their interest, citing vague concerns about my personal situation affecting my professional focus. The launch date for Phoenix Financial was postponed indefinitely as we reassessed our strategy. For the first time since leaving Rossmore, I felt the ground shifting beneath my feet. The second setback came from an unexpected source. The condo, which had been on the market for 6 weeks, finally received an offer, significantly below our asking price. The real estate market had cooled considerably, and properties in our price range were sitting unsold for months. The reduced sale price would mean less capital for each of us to rebuild with, a particular challenge for me given the investments I'd made in my fresh start. "We should accept the offer," my attorney advised. "The market isn't likely to improve in the short term, and finalizing the property division is crucial to completing the divorce." I agreed reluctantly. Another piece of my former life diminished in value. Another adjustment to the careful financial calculations I'd made. The third setback was the most personal. On a rare evening out with friends, my first real social engagement since the separation, I ran into Bruce and Emma at an upscale restaurant. They were seated at a prominent table, champagne flowing, Emma draped in jewelry that I recognized from the credit card statements I'd discovered months earlier. Bruce saw me first, his expression shifting from shock to something like satisfaction as he registered my reaction. He raised his glass slightly, a mocking toast that sent a flush of anger and humiliation through me. I excused myself from my friends and fled to the restroom, hands shaking, breath coming in short gasps. Standing before the mirror, I hardly recognized the woman staring back at me, eyes wide with hurt, cheeks flushed with anger and embarrassment. This wasn't the poised professional I'd worked so hard to become since the separation. This was the wounded wife, still bleeding from betrayal, still vulnerable to the specific pain only Bruce knew how to inflict. For a moment, doubt crashed over me in waves. Was I fooling myself? Was this whole Phoenix financial venture just an elaborate coping mechanism? A way to pretend I was thriving when I was actually just barely surviving? Was Bruce right to question my professional judgment, given how thoroughly he had deceived me in my personal life? I gripped the edge of the marble vanity, forcing myself to take slow, deep breaths. The woman in the mirror gradually calmed, her eyes hardening with resolve. No, I refused to allow Bruce's orchestrated humiliation to derail everything I had worked for. These setbacks, the client poaching, the conference cancellation, the reduced property value, this public flaunting of his affair, they weren't failures. They were tests. Tests of my resilience, my commitment to the path I had chosen. And I had never been one to fail a test. I returned to my friends, apologizing for my abrupt departure without explanation. I didn't look toward Bruce's table again. He didn't deserve my attention, my anger, or my pain. He had taken enough already. The next morning, I arrived at Stone Financial an hour earlier than usual, a new determination driving me. Setbacks demanded adaptation, not surrender. If Bruce was intent on blocking my path, I would simply find another route forward, one he wouldn't see coming until it was too late. We need to change our approach, I announced to Asher the morning after my restaurant encounter with Bruce and Emma. If we can't bring my former clients over immediately, we'll build from scratch with an entirely different demographic. Asher raised an eyebrow, intrigued. What are you thinking? The ultra-high net worth clients Bruce is targeting, they're actually a small segment of the market. There's a much larger group of women who need our services even more urgently, but aren't being served by traditional firms. I pulled up a presentation I'd been working on since dawn. Women in midlife transitions with moderate assets, $250,000 to $1 million. They're typically overlooked by luxury firms like Rossmore but have complex needs during divorce, widowhood, or career changes. They don't need champagne in the waiting room. They need practical guidance and emotional support during the most financially vulnerable periods of their lives. Asher studied the market analysis I'd compiled. The numbers are compelling, and without direct competition from Rossmore for this client segment, exactly, I said. Bruce can have his wealthy clients with their trophy wives and tax shelters. We'll build something more meaningful, and ultimately, more profitable in the long run. This pivot in strategy energized the entire team. Instead of postponing the launch of Phoenix Financial, we accelerated it, completely redesigning our marketing approach to target this underserved demographic. I developed seminars specifically for women going through divorce, created accessible financial literacy resources, and established partnerships with divorce attorneys who served middle-income clients. The first breakthrough came unexpectedly. A local women's magazine picked up our story, featuring Phoenix Financial in a cover article about innovative financial services for women. The journalist, herself recently divorced, conducted an in-depth interview where I spoke candidly about how my own experience informed my approach to helping women through financial transitions. You're using your pain as a professional asset, she observed during our conversation. That's remarkably brave. Her article captured exactly what made Phoenix Financial different: the authentic understanding that came from personal experience combined with professional expertise. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Within days of publication, we received over 100 inquiries from women seeking exactly the services we offered. The second breakthrough came through an unexpected ally. Carol, my former colleague from Rossmore, reached out with information That would prove invaluable. Bruce has been bad-mouthing you to clients, claiming you made emotional investment decisions during your marital difficulties, she said during our discreet coffee meeting. But I've kept records of all your client performance metrics for the past 5 years. She slid a flash drive across the table. Your investment strategies consistently outperformed not just the market benchmarks, but also Bruce's portfolios. By quite a significant margin, actually. This data became the foundation for a case study I published in a respected industry journal, analyzing gender differences in investment approach during market volatility. Without mentioning Bruce by name, the paper effectively countered his insinuations about my professional judgment while establishing my credibility as a thought leader in the field. The third breakthrough was both professional and deeply personal. During a financial empowerment workshop I was conducting for recently divorced women, one participant approached me afterward, her expression serious. "I need to tell you something," she said. "I'm Emma Crawford's cousin. She dumped your ex-husband 3 weeks ago when her father discovered he'd been lying about his financial situation and professional standing. I maintained my professional composure, thanking her for the information without revealing how significant it was to me personally. Later, alone in my office, I allowed myself a moment of vindication. Bruce had lost his wealthy girlfriend, the connections he'd hoped to leverage, and the financial cushion he'd been counting on. His carefully constructed facade was crumbling, not through any direct action on my part, but as the natural consequence of his own deceptions. There was a certain poetic justice in that. The final turning point came in late November, just as Phoenix Financial was gaining serious momentum. I received a call from the organizer of the Women's Leadership Conference that had rescinded my speaking invitation. "We've had a change in our board composition," she explained. "Robert Crawford has stepped down for personal reasons. We would like to reinstate your invitation to speak. In fact, we'd like to offer you a keynote slot." I later learned that Crawford's personal reasons included an SEC investigation into some of his investment practices, an investigation reportedly triggered by an anonymous tip about irregularities in his firm's reporting. I never discovered who provided that tip, though I had my suspicions about Carroll's extensive network and access to financial records. By early December, Phoenix Financial had exceeded all projections for client acquisition. Our specialized approach was resonating deeply with the demographic we'd targeted. I was fielding interviews from major financial publications, receiving speaking invitations from across the country, and, most satisfyingly, watching as some of my former clients began to discreetly reach out about transferring their accounts. The tide had turned. What Bruce had intended as career sabotage had instead forced me to innovate, to find my authentic voice and purpose. His attempt to diminish me had only made me more visible, more distinct in the marketplace. In trying to block my path, he had inadvertently pushed me toward a road I might never have discovered otherwise, one with far greater potential than the route I'd originally planned. One evening, as I was preparing for a major presentation, Asher stopped by my office. "Have you heard the latest about Rossmore?" he asked. I looked up from my notes. "No, what's happening?" "They're restructuring. Significant layoffs expected after the first of the year." He hesitated. "Bruce Wilson is reportedly among those being let go. Apparently, several major clients have complained about his handling of their accounts." I absorbed this information with surprising neutralness. 6 months ago, it would have felt like triumph, like justice. Now it simply felt like news, about a distant acquaintance, someone whose choices no longer had the power to affect my life or happiness. "I hope he lands on his feet," I said, and meant it. "Everyone deserves a second chance to rebuild." Asher studied me for a moment, then nodded with something like respect. "That's uncommonly generous, given the circumstances." I turned back to my presentation, a slight smile playing at my lips. "It's not generosity, it's freedom. I've reclaimed my future. That's victory enough for me." 6 months after launching Phoenix Financial, I found myself back at Maison Laurent, the restaurant where Bruce had proposed, where we'd celebrated paying off his debt, and where I now had a reservation to meet a potential high-profile client. The hostess led me to a quiet corner table, assuring me my guest would be seated upon arrival. I was reviewing my presentation materials when a familiar voice interrupted my concentration. Pia. I looked up to find Bruce standing before me, looking markedly different from when I'd glimpsed him with Emma months earlier. His designer suit hung slightly loose, his once perfect haircut grown out and showing hints of gray he'd previously colored. Most noticeably, the confident gleam in his eyes had dimmed, replaced by something that looked uncomfortably like desperation. "Bruce," I acknowledged, maintaining a neutral tone. "I'm waiting for someone." "I know," he said, sliding into the chair opposite mine. "There is no client. I asked Clyde to set up the meeting using a pseudonym. I needed to see you." I should have been angry at the deception, but I felt only a detached curiosity. "Why?" Bruce glanced around, then leaned forward. "My life is falling apart, Pia. I've lost everything. Emma, my position at Rossmore, my professional reputation. I can't even get interviews at second-tier firms. I'm 3 months behind on rent for my apartment." I remained silent, waiting for him to reach the point of this orchestrated meeting. "I need your help," he finally said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "A loan to tide me over, or even better, a position at Phoenix Financial. You're doing so well, and I have experience with the exact client base you're targeting. We always made a good team professionally." The sheer audacity of his request momentarily left me speechless. This man who had betrayed me in every possible way, who had actively worked to undermine my career, was now asking me to rescue him from the consequences of his own actions. "Let me be clear," I said, my voice calm but firm. "There will never be a place for you at Phoenix Financial. Not as an advisor, not as a consultant, not even as a client." Bruce's expression hardened. "After everything we went through together? After I helped build your career at Rossmore?" "My career that you tried to destroy," I corrected. "My clients that you attempted to poach with lies about my professional judgment. My speaking opportunity that you had canceled through Emma's connections." His eyes widened slightly, surprised that I knew the extent of his interference. "As for getting through things together," I continued, "I got through paying off your gambling debts. I got through discovering your affair. I got through rebuilding my entire life from scratch after you dismantled it. I did all of that, not we. Me." Bruce's desperate facade cracked, revealing the anger beneath. "You're enjoying this, aren't you? Seeing me brought low while you succeed. Your little phoenix rising from the ashes. It's all about revenge." I considered his words, realizing with some surprise that they held no truth for me anymore. "This isn't about you, Bruce. It hasn't been for months. Phoenix Financial exists because I finally recognized my own value and stopped diminishing myself. To maintain your ego. My success isn't your failure. They're completely unrelated events." I gathered my materials and stood to leave. "You taught me an expensive but valuable lesson about trust and self-worth. For that, I should probably thank you. But a loan or a job? No. Your financial decisions are no longer my responsibility." As I walked away, Bruce called after me. "You'll regret this, Pia. I still know people who could damage your reputation." I turned back briefly. "Threats now? That's disappointing, but not surprising." I met his gaze directly. "I'm not afraid of you anymore, Bruce. I'm not angry either. I simply have better things to focus on than the man who thought I was disposable." With that, I walked out of the restaurant and into the clear winter evening, feeling lighter than I had in months. The confrontation I'd once feared had come and gone, leaving nothing but confirmation of how far I'd traveled from the woman who had centered her life around fixing Bruce's mistakes. 1 year to the day after Bruce walked out, I stood at the podium, in a packed conference hall, looking out at hundreds of financial professionals gathered for the Women in Finance Summit. My keynote address, Rising from Financial Trauma, Building Resilience Through Crisis, had just concluded to enthusiastic applause. And now, I said as the applause faded, I'm excited to announce the next phase of Phoenix Financial's evolution. The screen behind me changed to reveal the new logo and name, Phoenix Partners, an independent financial advisory firm dedicated to serving clients in transition. Beneath it, the tagline, Your journey, your strength, our expertise. After the tremendous response to our specialized services, we're expanding beyond our initial focus to serve anyone navigating major life transitions. Divorce, yes, but also career changes, retirement, loss of a spouse, relocation, business, sales and inheritance management,